Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to participants in the UK and also internationally to this Savera UK's webinar. Today is the National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Honour-Based Abuse and Honour-Based Violence. My name's Aisling O'Dwyer. I'm the chair of Savera UK, and I'm delighted to be hosting this day. The 14th of July is the National Day of Remembrance for Victims of Honour-Based Abuse, and this date was chosen as it marks the birthday of Shafilea Ahmed, who was born in Bradford and murdered in Warrington in 2003 in a so-called honour killing. Shafilea was brutally murdered by her parents for being too westernised. I'll tell you more about her a little later on. Usually on this day, Savera UK would hold a conference, but this year, due to the pandemic, we've chosen to do something different. So today we're running this webinar to pay tribute to the victims of honour-based killings and honour-based abuse across the world, but also to shine a spotlight on survivors, and survivors are beacons of hope. The webinar will include speakers Nazir Afzal, who is a patron to Savera UK, and also he was former Director of Public Prosecutions for the Northwest of England. Afrah Qassim, who you will see on the screen, is the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Savera UK, and Afrah is just newly taken up the post at the beginning of May, which we're very excited about. We'll then hear the lived experiences from two survivors, followed by a poem written and read by a member of the Savera UK Youth group, which is a really vibrant group that has developed over the last 12 or 18 months with Savera. This will be followed by a question and answer session. But before we start, I'd just like to do a few housekeeping things. And this is the nature of this new media and having to do things through Skype or through Zoom. So firstly, just to let you know that all participants will be on mute, but I would encourage you to ask questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the top of your screens. And if you could specify, if you've got a specific question for one of the speakers, if you could say who the question is targeted at, that would be really helpful. As we go through, we'll be supplying you with additional information in the chat box. The event is being recorded, but in the recording, it will only be the panelists that you see on the screen and also the question and answers that I will be asking at the end of the session. That will be available later on our website. You will see a couple of black boxes on the at the bottom of the screen. Nikki and Shauna, who you can't see, are Savera UK staff, and they are helping us with the technical support throughout the webinar, and they will be managing both the information going into the chat box and also the Q&A. Secondly, and this is a more sensitive issue, some of the material presented and discussed in this session may trigger thoughts, feelings, emotions that are unpleasant. They may remind you of things that happened to you or to people close to you, and this may be upsetting. As this is an online session, we actually don't know where you are and how things will impact you. But please remember, do take care of yourselves. And if you feel overwhelmed, you can always switch off. You have that choice. If you are distressed, please try and speak to somebody that you trust. We will also be giving you our contact details should you wish to contact Savera after the event. To start off with, I would like to tell you more about Shafilea Ahmed. Shafilea was a 17-year-old British Pakistani girl living in Warrington. Like so many other girls of her age, she had ambitions to break away from home, from her parents, go to university, forge a career. In fact, she wanted to be a lawyer. But unlike most teenagers in the UK, she was torn between two cultures. Her parents were ultra conservative, Pakistani couple wanting her to marry a cousin who was 10 years older than her and become a devoted wife. While Shafilea wanted different things. She actually wanted to wear Western clothes, to have a boyfriend of her choosing, to be free, to have friends to make friends with whoever she wanted. And tragically, those two cultures just went in different directions. And as a result, Shafilea was murdered by her parents, brutally murdered by her parents in September 2003. It wasn't until 2012 that her parents were finally convicted of that murder, and they were given a 25-year prison sentence with no parole. And this was finally recognised as an honour killing, or so-called honour killing. That was the experience of one person. During the webinar, we'll hear of the experiences of some of those who've survived, and I think that's very much what we want to focus on today. But before that, I'd like to hand over to Nazir Afzal, who will tell us more about honour-based abuse and violence in the wider context. Thank you, Nazir.
Thank you, Aisling, and good afternoon to you all. Once again, I'm delighted to join Savera, even under the extraordinary circumstances that we're all in. I'm very privileged to be patron of Savera. I recognise phenomenal work that Afrah and her colleagues do on a daily basis to keep our most vulnerable people safe. As Aisling just mentioned, today is the Day of Memory. We worked really hard 7 years ago, Carmen Havana and myself, in order to get the government to create this Day of Memory. That our case was very simple. The people who are harmed or killed by their families, what their families are trying to do is extinguish them from history. And we need to, they're not going to remember them. So we as a community, as a society, need to remember the victims. And that's the persuasive case that we put to the government 7 years ago, which led, as you know, to this day. And it has, in its 7 years, been quite an extraordinary occurrence in raising awareness of an issue that some of you will be familiar with, others will have less familiarity about it. But the reality, of course, is that each and every one of us have a role and responsibility. When I prosecuted, I prosecuted until 2015. I was chief prosecutor, as you heard, for some half of that time. I learned about honour-based violence, forced marriage in 2004. I organised what I thought then was the first national conference. It actually was the world's first conference on the subject. And I listened to survivor stories, and I listened to people who had been massively impacted. And I made sure that parliamentarians and others in the media were in the room to hear these stories so that they got a feel for what they were dealing with. When people ask me, what is it we're actually talking about? What we're talking about is quite simple. We're talking about power and control. We're talking about people who, invariably family or relatives, or members of a particular community or communities, who just cannot take the fact that the victims can have a choice. Invariably, victims are female. There are male victims. Something like 15% of forced marriage victims, according to the Forced Marriage Unit, are male. I've dealt with homicides involving male victims, but the vast majority are females. And it's about males controlling female behavior. And when you step out of line, this is what the consequences that flow from that. I've tweeted yesterday about the names of the people that I've dealt with. According to the US State Department, I've had the fortune or misfortune to prosecute more honour killings, so-called honour killings, than anybody in the world. Something in the region of about 100 or so during my career. And each and every one of the names is etched on my mind, whether it's Samara, who was murdered because she fell in love with Mohammed in West London, or whether it was Alicia, who was murdered because her brother was texting a girl from another family, or Banaz Mahmood, who many of you will be familiar with, who was murdered by her family because she fell in love for the first time. These are people whose potential was extinguished, who had all the opportunities, but who were let down by the authorities. And by that, I mean all of us, whether it's policing, prosecuting, social services, children's services, schools, colleges, hospitals, you name it. You can always find failure at the heart of the terrible disaster that follows. Somebody somewhere didn't listen. And we learned very quickly that you have to have a recognition that the first contact is the most important contact. That invariably the victim finally builds up courage to go and tell someone. And what they don't want to hear from that someone is, come back tomorrow, I don't know what you're talking about. Or we'll signpost you to some organization that we've never heard of. You know, they need you to listen to them and then you to act quickly. And quickly is important. In Samara's case, whom I mentioned, her mother took her to her boyfriend and said, wash your hands of her, or I don't know what her father will do. 2 hours later, she was stabbed 18 times in the presence of 2 infant nieces who were splattered with her blood. 2 hours. So when you say, come back tomorrow, there isn't a tomorrow. And that's why we all have to recognize our responsibility and our duty to protect the most vulnerable. I was asked what the impact has been during lockdown. Well, some of you know I lost my brother during lockdown from COVID, so it's a very personal impact. But when it comes to honor-based violence and forced marriage, according to Carmen Ivana, who run the National Helpline, there has been a 200% increase in referrals. People have been ringing. You would think that they're locked at home, that they wouldn't have access to the phone. They are. They are really feeling the pain, and they are reporting their concerns. What then? You know, when we come out, as we are now, perhaps prematurely, coming out of lockdown, people are going to seek help. They're going to come run to you. Are you prepared? Do you have the resources in place to be able to provide the level of support that they're going to need? And my serious concern is that we don't. When the government were talking about funding more money to domestic abuse during lockdown, they didn't mention honor-based violence and forced marriage. You know, it was belatedly because we made them, but they did. When we talked about legislation going back with the domestic abuse bill, you name it, honor-based violence and forced marriage is always the afterthought. Yet it involves 15,000 forced marriages a year, attempts of forced marriage. It involves up to a dozen murders a year. It involves exporting a murder, so people being murdered abroad. And it crosses communities. Don't listen to anybody that tells you it's a brown issue or a South Asian issue or a minority issue. I've dealt with cases involving Catholic families. I've dealt with cases involving Irish families. I've dealt with cases involving traveller families. It happens across the board. And the last case I dealt with was a young girl that was on her way to Gretna to get married to her boyfriend, and her family stopped her on the way, or tried to stop her on the way at services. You know, it affects everybody and anybody, but we've got to recognize that disproportionately it involves our minority communities. But that still means that all of us have responses and all of us have to do something about it. And I'm seriously concerned, as I say, the resources aren't there. It's a shame that, you know, Savera and Carmen Ivana and Halo and all the other organizations that I work with and privileged to work with have struggled for their funding. You know, why should they have to spend 50% of their lives trying to raise monies when they ultimately want to protect the most vulnerable in society? It's a terrible, terrible waste. We know why it happens. It happens because we want to control, or people want to control other people's behaviors. We know we all have responsibilities, whether you're a GP, whether you're a neighbor, whether you're a grocer, whatever role or responsibility you have, you will probably hear somebody somewhere that is likely to suffer, and you need to act upon that information. And you need to be able to signpost to Savera or somebody else, or the police in an emergency. And the police, you know, we are continuing to train police officers up and down the country. I'm seriously concerned again for police officers. We've lost 500,000 years of experience when it comes to policing over the last decade. Yes, more police officers are expected, but a new student officer, a new officer is not going to have the same level of experience. We've got to help them. We're going to train them. We're going to support them. We're going to ensure that they're skilled up to do so. My final message, it's a very short space of time, I'm with you later on during Q&As, etc., is really about why it's important. And I remember 20-odd years ago, I ran into a woman at a conference, and I noticed that her wedding ring was not on her wedding finger, but was on the opposite finger of her hand. I said to her, why do you wear your wedding ring on the wrong finger? She said, it's because my family beat me and forced me to marry the wrong man. I looked at her straight in the eyes, and I saw a woman who had a life of hopelessness and of despair, a life of daily rape, a life where if she stepped out of line, she would be extinguished, and we would have to remember her on the 14th of July. And yet, this ring on the wrong finger was her only way of being able to protest, her only way of being able to try and send a message to you, to me, to all of us, that we need to help. This is about signposting. This is about support. This is about each one of us taking responsibility and not waiting for somebody else. If she doesn't have a voice, then it is our duty, ladies and gentlemen, to be her voice. Thank you. I'm now going to pass you on to our chief executive. And in fact, strange as it may sound, I haven't said our chief executive to this young lady, because she'd just been appointed as chief executive, even though she was the founder of Savera. So can I invite Afrah to speak to you, please?
Thanks, Nazir. As Nazir said, I'm the founder and the CEO of Savera UK, and I'm just going to give you a bit of background of Savera and why we've established the organisation. So Savera UK was established in 2010 as a result of service gap. It started as part of my work as a community development officer within the National Health Service. My role was around improving qualities within mental health services for Black and minority communities. I was the lead for women, children, young people. I was excited to develop this work. One area I wanted to look into was domestic abuse and the impact of mental health. My reason, I have seen too many abuse, and particularly women, in my family, friends, and the community. I also could have been married at the age of 11 years old if my father didn't put a stop to it. I also had to fight for my voice to be heard and be accepted. I was judged just because I didn't follow our culture tradition. Many times I was told the only reason you are this way is because you were brought up by an English stepmother. She's Irish, by the way. Another example that I wouldn't never forget was a time where I was invited to a community meeting. I was the only female amongst 10 to 15 men. They then asked me if I wanted to go because they thought I might be feeling uncomfortable being on my own amongst them. The issue they were discussing was on how to get women more involved in the community dialogue. During the discussion, I tried to speak, but my voice was dismissed. And when I finally spoken, my opinion was completely ignored. This made me even more frustrated and angry. Despite my freedom within my family home, I felt control with my own community. Also, after a group of young women in school asked their mentor for help around arranged marriage, and she contacted me due to my specific role within the city. Savera UK is about tackling culture-specific abuse across the UK. This means we speak out against and support the survivor of and those at risk from practices like honour-based killing and other forms of honour-based abuse. We are this year celebrating 10 years of existence. Before that, honour-based abuse and other harmful practices was none or hardly being spoken about here in Liverpool and within the Northwest. There was no record of cases. I was laughed at when I started asking what support there are for those young women. I was told we don't have a problem here. They quoted, it only happened in the Pakistani community. I was astonished by the response. This made me more determined. I knew this happened in my own community, and I am not from Pakistani background. I wanted to prove them wrong. So since then, and still a long way to go, but honour-based abuse is on the agenda in Liverpool City region and have specific protocol and policies in place. Cases of honour-based abuse are now specifically recorded, from none cases to over 80 cases received just in the last year to Savera for support. We have now our one-to-one support service, and in 2018, for the first time, Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner commissioned us to deliver a specialist harmful practices service, and I hope other areas will allow, as Nazir said, funding is crucial. We also have a helpline that operates across the UK. We deliver training to professionals, we do educational program to schools, and we also deliver a range of programs, including youth program, community engagement, and campaign such as today. We're also involved in research. For many communities, honour is very important. To dishonour your community or your family by doing something that is not in keeping with the norm of traditions, belief, or that culture is considered to bring shame on them. The consequences of dishonour can include physical, psychological, abandonment, and so death, also death. These at risk, those at risk comes from all cultures, including ones that you might not expect, such as the Irish travel communities, Eastern European, and amongst many. There are people from all ages, gender, and sexuality. This is why honour-based abuse is a problem for us all. It is everyone's responsibility to understand these practices in order to recognise the signs and call them out. Savera UK and many others like Carmen Ivana, Forward, Halo, as Nazir mentioned some, are continuing to tackle and fight such issue. It is time for us to break the silence and not hide behind fear of discrimination. These are not traditions that I'm proud of. These are the reason they call a silence practices. Do not say it's not my concern and it's not a police or social responsibility. We all have responsibility, and even more so those individual community leaders, key members who are from affected communities need to really start speaking out. We should be proud of our culture and be even more brave to stand against harmful practices. Let us be the change that we want to see. There should never be the price to pay for my freedom and the right to choose. Thank you. I'm going to read one of our clients who allowed us to read her story, and her name is Mary. So just bear with me. This is Mary's story. Since I was a young child, I was physically and psychologically abused by my family. This is a normal thing in my society. Nobody could help me because they considered this as a method of raising children. I called different places while I was living in my home country to ask for protection, but they didn't help me because they considered female abuse as a family matter. I'd been forced to accept a marriage to someone who I didn't know because my religion and my family tradition prevent me from having any contact with other gender before getting married. This man abused me for over 15 years. In those years, nobody helped me. I was lucky that the judge who was dealing with my divorce case was a real human. I also left my religion. I was pretending to follow it, as my family are very religious. They used to beat me if I didn't pray, force me to wear religious clothing, and cover all my body, and made me follow their religious rituals. I really couldn't keep pretending to be someone I'm not and be insulted by all males in the family. I didn't want my children to be forced to follow this religion either. I want them to have the ability to choose what they want. At the end, I was forced to leave my job and escape my home because my colleague discovered that I have issues with our religion. I was informed by one of my colleagues that there was an investigation going into my beliefs. I'm also an activist against my country's government, which made things worse for my safety. I have now converted to a religion that I believed in. I knew because of this, I will lose my identity. I will lose my custody of my children according to their religion, and I face the risk of punishment by death because the choice I have made are outside my family's and culture's values and traditions. If I return to my family, home and country, my family will kill me because they believe that I brought shame to them, because I escaped and went against what they believe. Savera UK is where I found comfort, advice, a listening ear, and practical help. Like getting close and the support they give me made me feel safe. and in a much better mind. My journey in this country is still going and terrifies me a lot, but the Savera UK team give me love and hope.
Thank you, Afrah. You can probably hear, even though that wasn't Afrah's story, that was Mary's story. That's a story that resonates across hundreds, if not thousands, of victims every year. Different extremes, but all often not, they are people whose behavior has been challenged, whose choices have been challenged, and who face, as she said, a complete loss of identity. And I think that's what we have to remember when we talk about whether we should deal with these things more seriously. Yes, that's what's at stake. Somebody's whole identity is at stake. The next bit I would like you to listen to is from our survivor ambassador, Savera survivor ambassador, Kiara Mohamed. Kiara's actually created a very short film for you, which is about her experience, and it's especially for this event. So I think it's certainly the first time I'm going to see it. I suspect it's probably the first time you're all going to see it. So it's world premiere of Kiara's little video. Once we've heard that, we'll hear a little bit more from Kiara, and then we'll have some more details, and hopefully Amira can come in if she's joined us by that time. So over to you, Kiara.
Hello. I'm just making sure that you can actually see me. My name is Kiara Mohamed. I am a survivor, and I volunteered for the last 10 years in and out, but now more in with Savera. I'm passionate about speaking up against forced marriage, honour-based violence, FGM, as those were my own life experiences. And I know for a fact when I was younger and going through this, it would have helped me. Maybe I would have left earlier if I saw people who were experiencing this, to offer me hope, and to sort of know you can survive this, because the other option was either you only had two options. You lived that and you accepted it, or you died, and the quite bleak options. And so I know when I was a teenager, if I had seen other survivors saying, here I am, and there's hope, I would have left earlier. So that's what I do. I'm an artist, and I use my practice where I can to speak up, because there is always hope and there is always help. It's just finding it and navigating that. So I've created this short film. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure you've heard the story. You know the story. And I'm going to ask you to put your feet in that person's story and imagine that you are going through this. The truth is, you can never truly know what it feels like until you've actually gone through it. But I'm going to ask you for the next few minutes that you imagine for a moment that it's happening to you. So you've left home. You've run away from a forced marriage. You've found a way to leave. You've used charities like Savera to help you leave, or you've gotten help from forced marriage unit. You found yourself in a new city because the old city or the old town that you come from is not safe for you to be there. So you're homeless. You stay in a women's shelter. Perhaps it's called Amadudu. Perhaps it's called something else. And you learn to build yourself up again without a blueprint, without much guidance. And then you fall pregnant. And then you find out that part of your clitoris was missing. And deep inside, you knew that all along. And then you walk around trying to figure out what is next. What do you do next? Who are you? Who have you always been? What do you like? What do you hate? What does love look like when you've not experienced it? And every night when you go to sleep, you tell yourself, I'm safe now. I'm safe now. I'm safe now. And you fall asleep to the words crashing against your skull, and not really sure if you actually are safe. But it's a start. And you realize something. You never had the time to recover from your trauma, that you have severe PTSD because of the things that you've gone through, the sexual abuse that you've gone through as a child back home, the physical and mental abuse that you've gone through, and your memories start returning in your sleep. Every night you're terrorized by your own memories of a child growing in abuse. Again, you wake up and you remind yourself, I'm safe now. I'm safe now. I'm safe now. But I'm not safe. You're not truly safe. You realize that you need to find a way to heal from your trauma. You need to find a way to let go of the past. And so you go into therapy and you start talking about all the things that have happened to you. And bit by bit, you shed the weight of the traumas. And some traumas and and some traumas have changed you forever. You accept that. You love yourself. You forgive yourself. You learn to let go. By this point, you've lived 11 years of surviving after being safe. By this point, you've lived 11 years after you have left home. After most people would say that you were safe. The story of surviving does not mean it ends when you're not physically in that space of hurting. The story of surviving continues. And we hold space and remember. For a moment, I asked you to live parts of my life. I thank you for obliging. I'm safe now.
Very, very powerful stuff, Kiara. Ayo has now joined us. I can see her. And I'm hopeful that what you're now going to hear is Ayo's poem. And as I said, immediately after Ayo's poem, can we please remain silent? Which is not that difficult. The technology being what it is, I think we'll all be silent anyway. But 1 minute silence to remember those whom we've lost. So over to you, Ayo. You need to unmute, Ayo.
Yeah, should be okay now. Thank you. I am Ayo and I'm part of the Savera UK Youth. And I wrote this poem and it's actually titled Honor. And it is honor. What does this word even mean? Why is it so important? So important that they're willing to kill my brothers and sisters in the name of it. What is so honorable about ending their lives? I will never comprehend it and I will never accept it. I will fight for you. I will fight for you to have the life you want. They will never break you. I can see the strength in you. There is no honor in what they do to you. There's nothing respectable about limiting someone's freedom.
For respecting that moment, that 1 minute of silence. Thank you, that was really important. Now we're going to move on to our question and answer session. And the first question that has come in, and you'll have to excuse me, I'll have to put my glasses on for this. It's a comment as well saying a really powerful webinar, thank you so much. This person, Sean, is deeply touched she's keen to know, to make sure that if anyone tells her that they need help, that she would feel confident to act immediately to help. What are the steps I should take if someone tells me they are escaping abuse and I am the first person they've told? And perhaps if I could direct that question to Afrah in the first instance, because very often it is that phone call that comes into the Savera helpline.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I think the first response would be is to identify their risk and also just believe in what they're saying, because many times those at risk are not believed and told to go back or what evidence they have and those kind of information that it's never there, you never find them. So I think believing in them and give them that confidence and trust that something will get done to save them. Risk assess the safety of them. Do they want to leave their home there and then immediately? Would they be safe if they going back? Do they need like safety plan that we can work with them? Definitely refer them to services like ourselves. Does the police need involved? The social services need involved? So those kind of the risk assessment that usually any service will do towards safeguarding. It's not complicit response or difficult response. It's just about following their guidelines and practical. There is a local protocols that they can follow. So there is difference, but first of most is believing in that individual, and if they want to leave that abusive environment immediately, then they would need to contact the police for support and taking them out and put them in a safe environment and stuff. But yeah, it's that kind of in an immediate risk assessment.
Following on from that, Afrah, could you just again repeat the one chance rule is the thing that Savera, that we live by, and I think it would be really helpful for participants, just if they get no other message, that they can understand that.
Yeah, Savera UK is, that's why we say the first rule is to believe in them, and that is one of our chance rule. Believe in them, never mediate, never not disbelieve in them and send them home, because that is where the one chance rule could be the last chance that they come to you for help. So it's what that listen to that individual, listen to that person who need our help and need our support. What exactly do they want? They're the one who knows the most environment and what risk they are deeply in. We should follow their guidance and what they need and how we can best support them. We can't assume this is how we do it and this is how it is, but it's the guidance. I think it's the only time I think we will act as professional is if that child is under 18 and we have to take that responsibility out of them and make that decision for them, is if they're a child and we are a responsible professionals. But it just listen to those individuals and what needed. And one chance rule is, you can find it in our website. We have a leaflet to tell you exactly what are the one chance rule. We have also the information about the risk and how you act if there's a lot of information in our website that they can be found. And if they wanted further advice, is we are happy. We get calls every day from professionals to give advice and support for professionals.
Fine, thank you. A backup question to Nazir. You spoke about honour-based abuse affecting all cultures. What advice would you give to someone who didn't think they could be at risk of honour-based abuse because they're not from a culture that they associate it with?
Okay, well, I think it goes a little bit is what just Afrah just said a moment ago, is you need to listen between the lines. When they're telling you that I don't want to go down a certain route, I don't want to follow the choices that I've been given, or I haven't been given any choice, then you know you're in the subject matter. You know you are dealing with issues which are replicating honor, or so-called honor. I think that's number one. So it goes back to listening, and listening appropriately, and finding time to listen. One of the things that I tried to touch on earlier on is that whichever organization you're in, you don't have to be, all of you have to be experts, but your front-facing people need to know what they're looking for. So if somebody, just think about, I'm just trying to imagine a situation, a young girl who's facing forced marriage will run to the first big building that she can think of. So it might be DWP, it might be the school, it might be a hospital. And when they turn up at reception, the last thing they need is a reception saying, what the hell are you talking about? You know, so even somebody on reception or security needs to have even the tiniest bit of understanding, so they can then signpost for help. It goes back, going back to what Afrah said about the first chance rule. But as I said earlier on, I have examples across all communities. I cannot think. I've dealt with a case involving the Jewish community. I've dealt with a case involving, strong Catholic background, Muslim, Sikh, Hindu. I can't think of a faith or community that hasn't had this type of problem or this issue within its midst. And therefore, I think if we're talking to the professionals here, they must leave their assumptions and their prejudices at the door. Don't bring them into the room. Because when you are facing, for example, give you an example, you're facing a British white girl who was born and brought up here, who lives in the Wirral, whatever it may be, who you would think never ever would be touched by this issue. She may tell you that her mum, she's pregnant, and her mum says, you must marry X, Y, Z. You are now dealing with the issues of honor that Afrah will deal with in any other community. So don't follow your prejudices and assumptions. Leave them at the door. Listen to what you are hearing, and then act upon what you are hearing. I think that is the best advice anybody can give you. Don't simply assume, oh my God, she's not brown. What's the issue here? I'm afraid it's every community at any community, and it manifests in very different forms. And therefore, you as a professional or practitioner need to recognize that.
Thank you. Thank you, Nazir. The next question is to Kiara. And the question is, how did you come up with the concept for your film? Why ask the viewer to be in your shoes rather than just tell your story directly?
That's a good question. For as long as I've left home, I've always spoken about forced marriage and female genital mutilation and honor-based violence, and I've noticed that as time goes by, people are just like, oh, I know the story, I know what happens next, and there's just a presumption that because they know one person's story, they know everybody's story and how they've either survived leaving, or they've unfortunately become victims, and I feel like to ask someone for a few minutes to live parts of my life, and they're not going to know what it really feels like, but for a few minutes, just imagine you have all these things happen to you. Where do you start? In building yourself, in building your life, who are you without your family? Who have you always been? And just to really think about what happens next, and where do you go from there? And I think that's such an important question. Because I remember when I was homeless and I lived in a women's shelter, somebody said to me, "Oh, you're safe now, you know, you're okay, you should be happy." And I wasn't happy, and I wasn't happy for a very long time. And I couldn't understand myself. Why wasn't I happy? Why, you know, I'm now not physically in any harm. And trying to figure that out took so many years. And I hope to sort of be able to help people in giving them some sort of cheat code. Life is pretty hard, but if I can, at the end of it, such a thing to say, "Oh, I'm okay now," but it's an ongoing process, and acknowledging that it's an ongoing process of survival and an ongoing process of healing and knowing who you are and learning who you are, really actually gives the idea that as a community, not just organizations, but as a community, we all need to help one another out. If you know somebody who's gone through it, or if you know of somebody, being there and knowing that one way or another, by just listening, guiding them, it would actually help them. And so, yeah, just wanted to be able to say, if that was happening to you, what would you do? And really think about how would you get help? What would you do next? And if all the questions are really hard to answer, then that kind of gives you an idea. Actually, it's quite a long, arduous process.
Thank you. That's really, I mean, you know, your creativity lives through the work that you do, and I know that we will see more of it as you engage more with Savera and continue to use your art to be able to express some of these really deep emotions, which perhaps is a different way of telling the story. So thank you. Now, another question is, as a commissioning organisation, we're extremely proud to work with Savera. This has been a fantastic, powerful event. Funding and contract length is an obvious problem that we always try to improve upon. But what more can we do to better support Savera and similar organisations who then go on to support survivors? So perhaps if I could address that to Afrah. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, I think the continuous support, as we said, yeah, funding is a huge issue. I think one of the areas that we would love to develop and the services that we need to do at the moment, as Kiara has proven, that survival is not just taking somebody from the abusive environment into a safe environment and that's it, everything is fine. I think it's the aftermath. It's that kind of a long journey, and that's why Savera has we never brought a dead end to the support. Is our client can come back and leave whenever they want, and we continue to support them. Some of them might just need short support, some of them might need, but I think it's that therapeutic support that I think we definitely lack in. The generic support that is part of the health service, it's not specialist enough to understanding those issues that we deal on a daily basis around those issues that Savera deal with. It's so complex. You need to have a really very specialist trained professional who really have an in-depth understanding of what actually honor-based abuse, what cultural specific issues that this individual are facing, and the length of the support and emotional support that goes with it. It's not a 6 weeks group work that some of those services will deliver within mental health services. I think you need to kind of really have that developed, and that I think it's definitely that we see on a daily basis. Many, some of them who have historic issues that they need to deal with. So for example, you know, somebody who's a survivor of female genital mutilation as a child, but as an adult that's trigger out and they come to us for that emotional support. We at the moment lack that support, and that is one area that I would love to develop and give those opportunities for our survivor or our client to be able to really look into that psychological and how these issues impact on them. So definitely.
Fine, thank you, Afrah. The next question is a question from Neve and a comment. Thank you for a very powerful webinar and for sharing your experiences. What are the most valuable ways in which the general public can support Savera? And I'm thinking maybe, Afrah, if you could say a little bit about the training and the type of other things that, because people, the general public, very often work in organisations that could have an impact. So perhaps if you would say a little bit about that, and then if I could go to Ayu to say about the youth, Savera Youth Group, and the work, the collection of individuals that came together, which was very much a public youth driven development. So if I could go to Afrah and then to Ayo, thank you.
As I have mentioned in my earlier presentation, that when we started this work 10 years ago, the word forced marriage did not exist. Honor-based abuse did not exist. People talking about an arranged marriage, and what I used to argue is arranged marriage and forced marriage is completely different, and took us a long time to try and spell the difference between arranged and forced marriage. And finally, you know, within our area and surrounding, is we have quite a lot of an understanding around those issues, and that only come because of the training, the continuous training, the campaign that we do. You know, it does not matter what professional you are. As I said, somebody just could come to a supermarket and ask you for help, because that's probably the only chance that they have to ask for that help. So that person who works at the supermarket should be able to understand what forced marriage is, what honor-based abuse is, and what harmful practices are, to be able to guide that individual and understand where to refer them to. So awareness raising, you know, the campaign that we did last year in the middle of the town centre, and we've spoken to over 500,000 people just to raise awareness, and they just came to see what we're doing. I've never heard that before. It does not happen here, and we have proven that this issue does exist in our city. This issue does exist in our region, because we see the client that we see and the referral that we see on a daily basis. So education and training in school, in universities, in health, you know, professional across statutory, voluntary, and as I said, the most importantly, our communities need to start speaking out about it. Those affected communities need to say wrong is wrong. These are not tradition that we should be celebrating. These tradition that we should say stop to them. So communities need to play a huge part in that.
Thank you very much indeed. And over to Ayo. Thank you.
Yeah, Aya. So we started this journey with Savera like over a year ago, and we kind of came all together as young people to kind of raise awareness on like topics such as honor-based abuses, because it's not just something that adults are meant to actually talk about, but it's like us as young people, we need to take that responsibility to actually get more knowledge on what it actually signifies, because like that's how we can actually get to a position where we can actually see a change in the future, which is obviously what we all are hoping for, and we are trying to get all together and achieve. So like as young people, we just keep trying to like raise awareness among like our peers, but obviously give like a different perspective to also like adults, because like we are trying to show them that there's other ways that we can go about how to speak about those sensitive topics most of the times. And we have had like few different project and conference that we already like had, and the most recent one was the one that we had in November, which was like a youth-led conference, and we used not just like, we had like survivor speaking, which was amazing, and we also had like us as young people using photography to actually speak about like what those signify. And we was just able to use like different form of art to actually talk about topics which are sensitive. And it's kind of, thinking about it is probably like very impactful, because you can use like visual forms to actually see what we're trying to express to other people. And we still obviously sorry. Yeah, so like we're still trying to work, and also we are still like in lockdown and everything, but we're still trying to find other ways to interact with other people. So we have like other projects that we're working around.
Oh, it's happened again.
He's gone.
I'm not. Can you unmute?
She's frozen.
I think the screen might have frozen. But I think
now.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So we're still trying to work throughout this whole situation, and still trying to find ways to engage with other people and with other young people, and trying to get them as involved as they can, because it would be not just great to have like a small group of people getting involved, but like getting others to come and join us, and obviously join Savera UK Youth or any like other youth group which, you know, can help into raising this awareness that we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, I would like to congratulate you as chair of Savera on the work that you do. And I was being very modest there in not acknowledging and singing their praises, because they recently won an award last month for the work that they're doing with us. So big congratulations to you. We've got a couple more questions, and I realise time is moving on. So thank you, Ayu. The next one is from Mariam, who is asking the question, I would put this one to Nazir. What is the best way in order to reopen an honour-killing case which has been closed due to the suspect being on the run?
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know the circumstances of that particular case, but I can tell you that no homicide case is ever closed. So even if we've heard examples today. Shafilea case took 9 years for a conviction. Tule Goran's case took 15 years for a conviction. Banaz Mahmood, she was murdered in 2006. Most recent conviction, there were 6 people being convicted, was in 2016, 10 years later. So there is no time limit on homicides. So it's a case of if you've got new information in relation to somebody, then you bring that to the attention of the investigating officer. So if it's Cheshire Police, Merseyside Police, whatever it is, you take it to them, whatever information you have, and they will look at it. So, as I say, no homicide is ever closed until somebody's been brought to justice.
Thank you. That's very clear answering there. So thank you for that. The next one, and I guess this is another one for Afrah. Where did the name for the organisation come from?
Yeah, when we started the organisation, there was a group of us when I set up the group around discussing the issue of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse and within BME communities. And when we wanted to set up the organisation, part of the group was two Indian background colleague of mine who part of the finding of Savera, and we were trying to come up with a name, and then they said, why don't we call it Savera, because it's the meaning of Savera is new beginning, new start, new horizon. And I just thought with the name and what the aim of the organization is doing is just it's a perfect name to the work that we do. So it's a Hindi word that means new beginning.
Fine, thank you. We've had lots of nice messages in saying thank you very much. We've got another question that's actually come in saying, Mr. Afzal, what would be your advice for a teenager who's attempting to force the FBI to reopen? I think, has that one been answered?
Yeah, it was asked at the beginning, I think. But I'm aware of a number of cases that are taking place in the United States of America. As we've discovered recently, the Americans are a very different beast to anything that we have to deal with. And there's an extraordinarily long process. And you can't tell them what to do. Any British police officer will tell you that they live in a very surreal world of their own. But I know if it's the case I'm thinking of, there's a statewide campaign, a United States-wide campaign taking place, led by an organization called Tahira, which is a bit like Savera, and also another organization whose name escapes me now. So there are campaigns America side, which you don't need to worry about over here.
Fine, thank you. A nice message I would like to pass on to everyone from Katie, saying thanks to IO for sticking with technology issues and for her beautiful poem, which she read earlier on. Great to hear about the youth work in your organisation. Thank you. And that actually came from Katie. I'm just checking to see if there are any more questions that need answering. I think that might be it. I know Kiara and in fact Nikki, who is our technical support, are going to have to leave in about 1 minute because they're going off to do an interview for Granada Television for this evening. So I'd like, before she disappears, I'd like to say a very big thank you to Kiara and also to Nikki, who's done an amazing job supporting us. I've just checked that I know you're going to go. I'm just checking that there aren't any more. Another comment for Kiara saying this was just eye-opening. It was so thought-provoking. So just so you get that feedback before we finish. I think as we are winding down to the last couple of minutes, I'd just like to say a very big thank you to everybody who has joined us on this webinar. It was a first for Savera, and it's certainly a first for me chairing a meeting on Zoom. But I hope you found it informative, engaging. We would very much like to keep in touch with people. If you're interested, you will see there are lots of links that both Shauna and Nikki have been putting up throughout the webinar. I would like to thank Nazir as our patron, as ever, coming to support us, which we always appreciate, to Afrah, who founded the organisation, and to Ayo as our youth ambassador, and to Shauna as a member of our staff who also supported us. As Nazir said earlier, we do work in partnership with other organisations. He mentioned Carmen Nirvana earlier on. They had an event earlier on today. This work is really important. Savera is very happy to work with other organisations. We do reach out, and now with our full-time chief executive, we'll be able to do that even more. So I would just really like to finish by saying thank you once again. If you want to get involved with us, please do get in touch. We really appreciate the funding that we do receive. I know at times it felt like we were asked, it seemed to be money was an issue, and it always is an issue. But big thanks to police and crime commissioners, to the big lottery, who have really taken us an extra step over the last 12 months or so. We look forward to their ongoing support. And working with others. If at the end of this anybody would like to make a donation, there is you can go onto the Savera UK website and you'll find out how to do that.